Okay, trying now. Can you just let me know if you're hearing what we're seeing? Okay, fab. I've heard that's working now. Apologies about that. So just to recap then, we are looking at, sort of being able to create an equitable access for our learning sort of environment for students, and being able to make sure that all students are able to access sort of learning in a way that suits them. So when we're thinking about using PowerPoint, it's a really nice and simple kind of idea that by using PowerPoint, we can use subtitles. That's going to help our students with hearing impairments. That's going to help our students with EAL, or, where the language of the classroom is not their first language. And certainly when we're thinking about sort of getting the most out of this, we can either do that from a normal kind of PowerPoint slide, but presentation point of view where we've got the subtitles, or we can also present live. So let's look at that option now. So what we can do is we can pick our audience. Okay, so whether that is anyone or only people in your organization. To be honest with you, if you just sharing kind of that with your internal class, you can just make that anyone. In which case, the reason for that is quite useful, is because we're going to then embed that in Teams in a moment. So I can choose to present live. Okay. And what that's going to do is create effectively a bit like a PowerPoint room, okay, for students to be able to join. Okay. And so that will generate a hyperlink for you, okay, which I'm just going to copy, and then a QR code that students can use to join the session, and then effectively you'll see how many people have joined. Okay, so now that's really useful, because when you go through and effectively start to show your slides, you can have the subtitles be in English, but effectively for the students, they can then customize that for the way they want to see it. So if I just pause that for a moment, okay, I'm going to head over to Microsoft Teams. Okay, and I'm going to get effectively a tab in a channel. And what I'm going to do is embed the PowerPoint Live into the channel there. Okay, so let's let that load up. There we go. Okay, so I'm just going to go into my primary class here, and then I can click on a tab at the top, and all I'm going to do is do a really simple thing. I'm just going to add a website, okay, as the tab option. Okay, let that finish loading up. There we go. So I'm going to just choose a website, and the website link I'm going to use then is that PowerPoint Live. Okay, so we'll just call that PowerPoint Live. Okay, and I'm not going to post to the channel about it. Don't need to do that at the moment. Click Save, and now the PowerPoint Live is embedded for the students. Okay, and what we can do is actually translate that into another language. So for instance, if we wanted to translate that into, say, Romanian, okay, effectively for the student, all they would need to do by putting that in Teams, all they need to do is effectively navigate to the tab in the team. We have effectively then making that available for the students to be able to access. Okay, so let's just pop that there, and effectively also we can make that full screen. Okay, so they don't even need to kind of see that they're in the Teams environment once they've kind of opened that up. They're just joining you kind of on the journey of your PowerPoint, and then any of your comments that you're making and what slide you're on, okay, will actually then appear on the side there. So if I just grab my PowerPoint here, so I've just put my PowerPoint onto the other screen for a second so that you can see kind of the student experience. Okay, I'm just going to resume my PowerPoint. And we can see when I move on to the next slide, it's starting to translate that for me there. Okay, so let's escape there. Okay, fantastic. So we've then got the ability, if we pop over to back to our PowerPoint here, we can resume that session or end it. We can set it up in advance, but that just means that we've got that key area there to utilise, particularly if students have got devices in the classroom that they can access the learning on. We can use PowerPoint Live, embed that into Microsoft Teams quite nicely, and then students have got that second kind of aspect of accessibility that they can utilise as and when is relevant. So I'm just going to end that session there. Once you've ended it, key thing to point out is if you then want to use that again, you're going to generate a new hyperlink each time you do that, and you're going to share that out with the students. Okay. Thinking about from an equity point of view, while we're here in PowerPoint, we also do have the Rehearse with Coach. So for students where perhaps there's a sense of lower confidence, perhaps there's a social emotional learning, sort of confidence conversation that you're having, certainly for the students, being able to then rehearse their presentations for example, if we've set a learning task where students are being asked to present to the class and you have a student where actually that's causing a high level of anxiety, you can actually get them to go and practice this using the Rehearse with Coach. Effectively gives them an artificial intelligence kind of response that allows them to kind of practice that, to then build their confidence, potentially then to go and present to the class. So it's just kind of, again, giving us the different tools that we've got available to us really nice and simply. This is just using a web browser with a device with a mic. Effectively, they can use that to practice. So if we click on Rehearse with Coach, just have a look, let that load up. Okay, we should get a dialog box in the bottom right hand corner that will sort of tell us about kind of how we're getting on. It can work as we're going along, and it can also pick up. I just need to allow that there. There we go. So there we go. We can see the start rehearsing, and that should then start to actually pick up different points. So it's telling me to face the camera. It's telling me not to use too many ums. Don't use things like okay, all right, and it's sort of giving me that feedback. Okay, so I'm just going to pause the session there. Okay, and then we'll escape out of it. So then I get rehearsal point. Okay, and it's telling me kind of that my pace is right, my pitch is right, and so on. But it's giving me some suggestions for different things around kind of keeping my face clear and so on. Perhaps it doesn't like the fact I've got a fringe, but effectively it's giving me the things that I need to look at. Okay. Okay, so that's sitting within both PowerPoint Online and PowerPoint Desktop. We've also got the ability to then utilize kind of the captions, even in sort of things like Microsoft Teams and Microsoft Teams meetings. The captions kind of appear in lots of different places. And, sort of even if we were to look at being able to go into, say, Flipgrid. Okay, and if you've used Flipgrid before, incredibly useful tool for students to be able to have a voice. So again, thinking about from an accessibility point of view, sort of students being able to access learning tasks in a different way. So not necessarily kind of in a standard written sense, but being able to access, responding to learning tasks in a range of different sort of aspects. So if we take our class here, okay, and we'll take this example that we created before. There we go. So effectively, we can then turn on the closed captions. So, I mean, this example is actually, sort of a member of our team pretended to be a student for a moment. But actually, if this were me recording a clip for students, perhaps I've recorded a learning example where I'm taking students through how to do a particular thing. So we were talking earlier on around, sort of maths concepts and being able to talk through different maths concepts. The key thing for us is that we can turn those captions on for students, or they can turn them on themselves. And within the closed captions, we can actually see, you know, sort of a whole, effectively almost like a transcript that we can then actually look at, and we can jump to that point in the video as well. So that can be really, really powerful for students, if they, you know, sort of, again, if they've got hearing impairments, if they are, or hearing impairment even, or if they are students with EAL, we've got the closed caption there that we can utilize. Okay, so that pretty much kind of transcends across most kind of different things video wise within Office 365. It will even kind of, even if you're using Microsoft Edge as well, it will then use the picture in picture options to be able to, so you've got the picture in picture there. Okay, you can even sort of utilize the captions within here as well. Okay, so captions, incredibly powerful. Let's think about text generally. Okay, so if we take the Immersive Reader as an example, this is something that's been very well used for a number of years now, actually. But what we've got is the ability for students to really make learning sort of fully accessible from wherever they are. So any text that we have, so I mean, I've got kind of some heavy duty kind of text on photosynthesis here. This is not particularly accessible. If we think about students with dyslexia, you know, sort of the obvious answers around kind of background color and so on, we'll have a look at in a moment. But actually, the Immersive Reader, whilst it is designed for students with dyslexia in its initial kind of design, actually, when we think about it, there are many different ways that this actually kind of works for a number of different learning needs. So, for instance, if we have a student with ADHD, okay, or students with dyspraxia even, effectively thinking about those neurodiverse different needs that we have kind of present in our classroom, being able to do things like clear away the visual clutter can be really, really useful for students. So if we take this point here and put this into the Immersive Reader, so I'm just using the View tab. I'm using Word Online, just nice and simply, but this does work in OneNote, it works in PowerPoint, it works in Flipgrid, in Minecraft even. And so effectively, by having the Immersive Reader there, we have the ability to kind of change all of that in terms of layout. So we can change the text preferences, we can change the background color, increase and decrease the spacing. So again, if you've got students with sight impairment, then they have the control here. And this is something I'm really, really passionate about, that students are in control of their learning needs. So they're in control of you know, making things suit the way that they need them and the way that they need to see them. And so rather than me photocopying kind of a resource onto a coloured piece of paper and then effectively labelling the student with their need, what I've got here is the ability to effectively give that, you know, resource to the student in whatever format it's currently in, and then the student be able to then be in charge of that accessibility, rather than, you know, sort of me labelling them. They can change that into a more handwritten style font. So it is Comic Sans, but that does, with the handwritten A, is more accessible for students with dyslexia. Okay, and they can change the background color to a range of different options. They also can break down things like the syllables. Now, I'm an English teacher by nature, so I love this anyway, because I can take any text and I can break the syllables down. You know, English teachers spend a lot of time clapping and putting their hands under their chins to talk about syllables, but actually being able to take any text and break the syllables down is really useful. But certainly when we're thinking about emerging readers, so, you know, we've just had 2 years of massive disruption for students with their learning, and there will be students where, you know, sort of their reading progress has, you know, halted somewhat. This can certainly support that. And we can certainly do things like sort of label the different parts of speech. So again, for those students where they're developing their language skills, they're developing their reading skills, we've got that ability to kind of give them the tools to make that accessible. Okay, so we have the reading preferences. So we can do things like turning on the line focus, and we have, you know, sort of number of people kind of, who complain about the cost of physical overlay rulers that you put on top of text. And the problem is that once you've got an overlay ruler, the middle color is fixed, isn't it? So, but here we don't have to pay for anything. And they're quite expensive, but we don't have to pay for anything. And again, the student can take any text and effectively put the overlay on. And again, if we just make that full screen, visual disturbance has gone away. We're just focusing on the text, and we can then just hear that aloud. Okay. Now, we do also have, we'll just take that off. We've got the picture dictionary, so we can click on different words within the language there. Again, really, really powerful for students that are emerging readers. But then because we can bring in the translate option, okay, and I always do the demo usually using Arabic, but certainly I've got a colleague kind of joining me on the call today, and they've pointed out, sort of actually we have a lot of students who are been displaced by what's happening in the Ukraine. And so actually, sort of for a lot of students where that is the case, and where students are refugees and kind of, sort of there is a lot of movement around, this can be really, really powerful. So in fact, sort of Ukrainian is actually in the list as well there. And so, and in fact, there's a lot of support from Microsoft around kind of making sure that Ukrainian languages are present in all of the different kind of translation tools in different spaces. Okay. I will just bring us back to the Arabic, and there's a reason for that. It's just simply because of the way it reads. Okay, so for a student, if they were sort of with English is not their first language, so effectively, so it could be Arabic, Ukrainian, whatever it is. Okay, each word we can have that word in English, that word in Arabic. Okay, but then also we can actually turn that on for the whole text. Now, the reason I actually use Arabic to do the demo was one, I used to teach kind of in an area where a lot of my students were Arabic was their first language. And actually, the most important thing is actually this reads from right to left. So when we're taking a text that is in, sort of one different alphabet structure, sort of, and is read in a particular way, that will actually then read from right to left. Okay, so but we have, again, the student has the control over that, and there's a myriad of different languages that are available there within that. Now, what we can also do is we can use that moving forward. It's not on yet. We haven't quite got it yet, but you will have the reading coach is also kind of going to be brought into this. So at the moment, we have reading progress. Okay, we will be having the reading coach moving forward. Okay, so there'll be lots of extra resource. For that means that the students will be able to practice reading this text aloud to an AI, and the AI will correct them if they get things wrong and so on. So effectively at the moment, this is very one way. The AI reads the text for us, but we'll also have the ability to then read the text to the AI as well. Okay. Okay, so we have, we said we've got the captioning, we've got the Immersive Reader. Okay, one thing just to point out around the captioning that we haven't mentioned here is that that's also going to have, or it does have the ability to have live translations in the notebook as well. So you can actually set up your OneNote, okay, to have translations in place. And so you do that using Microsoft Translate. So what we'll do is we'll start off by going to the Microsoft Translator tool. Okay, so it's just very simply going online. You can do a quick search, okay, and that'll bring up kind of your, sort of the ability to convert things here. But we're just going to go to this translator.microsoft.com. Okay, and then what we're going to do is set up a code. Okay, so we're going to start a conversation, okay, using Microsoft. Okay, there we go. Okay, and then we go. Okay. So we need this conversation code. Okay, so we can start this kind of point here. We need this conversation code, and we're just going to grab that. Okay, because what that's going to do is that's going to allow us to use OneNote, okay, for that conversation. So we can then go into, okay, live captions. And just let that load up. So that means that if we're using, say, Class Notebook, we're using OneNote, we want to be able to effectively build in the captioning within that as well. We've easily got that available within the OneNote tool. Okay. Just give that a bit of a refresh. Okay. So what should happen then is that should come up with the option to join a translate option. So you do have to kind of set this translate, where we are, there we go, this translate kind of option up here. Okay, and you can host that, and that's then what you would then be able to put in here. Does seem to be struggling a little bit, so I'm just going to just pop into. Okay. By the looks of that, the service might not be live at the moment. It might not be working at the moment, but effectively that should, in a similar way to PowerPoint Live, in a similar way to Teams, you know, give us the option to utilize kind of the live captions here, and then it would actually give us the option for a transcript of those captions as well, to be able to access at a later point. Okay, so I'm not going to hang around if that's not working for the moment, but that is available within the View tab and under Live Captions. Okay. Okay, so we'll just get rid of that for the moment. Okay, fantastic. So just close all of those down. So then thinking about sort of going back to Teams, okay, and thinking about that social and emotional learning. So when we think about inclusive design for our lessons, we're thinking about different ways students can access learning. So whether that is, you know, like we've mentioned around things like Flipgrid, about, you know, sort of being able to kind of create learning experiences that are accessible for students. There is also the conversation around making sure that, you know, all students are, you know, sort of working in the way that they would need to, but also from their emotional point of view, you know, that they are, you know, sort of safe and happy and so on. So we can actually make the most of using, so I'll just use this one here, the Reflect app. Okay, so you can basically build different reflections. Now, whether they are sort of things like how are you feeling today, or how you feeling about the material we've covered, they are, you know, a range of different kind of conversations that you can have with students, and that's really simply, you know, sort of being able to get them to reflect on their learning. So when we think about kind of that sort of, I used to kind of study around building learning power and that kind of thing, but actually just being able to get students to reflect on how they feel about their learning and why they feel that way. You know, so for instance, if they're feeling really unhappy about something and then they put that they're anxious, you know, what is it they're anxious about, and getting them to be able to actually reflect that is you know, sort of a really powerful option. And then being able to chart that over time is potentially really powerful too. So we can do that by just going into a conversation. Okay, just choosing the Reflect tab. I just clicked on the three dots there. It's not appearing in my list here, but if I just click on that, that's going to let us into the Reflect, and then we can set our reflection there. Now for the student, that's really, really useful because they can kind of do this in a protected space. Students are not going to see each other's reflections. You can let it so that they can see a summary of the reflections, but they're not going to see the actual reflections necessarily. They'll only see their own. Okay, so for instance, if I wanted to put that today I'm feeling, let's say, tired. There you go. They get an emotions monster. Okay, and they've put in there that they feel tired. Now, the key thing for the student is that they'll also be able to see that over time. So it could be that they're looking at being able to chart how they're feeling. Then you've got a conversation you can have with them around, sort of why they're feeling that way constantly. Why are they always unhappy on Mondays? Those kinds of conversations. Or it could be actually they're feeling really happy, in which case, that's a different conversation to be having. The key thing for us is that for the students, and particularly when we're looking at supporting students where perhaps they are non-verbal, okay, and find it difficult to access kind of conversations verbally, or even just kind of being able to talk about emotional things, sort of verbally with teachers. Perhaps they don't feel like they can kind of use their voice in that way, or they don't want to. This gives us a different way, a different route in for students to be able to reflect on how they feel. So if we take this one here, okay, so this is much more kind of a learning question. Okay, how we feel about the material we covered today. Let's just choose a different one. I'll let that load up. So we've actually got a student responded there, so we can see kind of that they're happy. We can see kind of an overview of who's kind of answered and what they feel. We can then go into the insights. So built into Microsoft Teams, we have class insights. And with Reflect, because that's been built in both Teams and in Class Notebook, we can actually get insights on both options here. So we can see that in Teams how they're feeling over a particular time, so we can drill that down by students. So if we say, let's do a customized range just for a moment. There we go. Okay, we can see, we can drill that down by responses. Okay, we can drill it down by student, we can drill it down by different reflection questions, we can go by a different range and so on. Okay, so if we are picking on, a good thing here, we can also see our most common words. So actually, if we do in the month of May with our year 6 students, for instance, they're all preparing for SATs at the moment. Perhaps we do a learning reflection, sort of regularly, effectively, then we can actually see kind of what the most common words are across, that whole class, or for that particular student, what their most common words are. So you can drill that down as you need to. Good thing there is if they've put in an emoji, we're not just getting that, we are actually getting kind of the language kind of around that as well. Okay, so that can be for both learning questions and it can be from a social and emotional sort of point of view. And just to recap, that's really powerful for those students who really don't feel like they can, or they either don't want to or they can't access talking about that with you. Okay, it's a lovely point within there that talks about how do your friendships feel today. So when you go into the Reflect app and you choose the questions, there's one on here about how do your friendships feel. So when we think about kind of building students back up from the last 2 years of disruption and so on, one of the big things is actually, sort of friendships and how they're communicating kind of with their peers. And for students with SEN, actually, that's going to be sort of amplified potentially. So actually thinking about sort of being able to give students a reflection on not just how they personally feel, but generally how things around them feel as well can be really, really useful. And that sits also, we said, within OneNote. So under the class notebook tab, it's not showing up here, but effectively you should have the reflect option. So let's just pick that up here. Do that in the online version. We should be able to pick that up. Okay. Go. Okay, there's class notebook tool. There we go. There we are. We can see it's reflect there. So if I just add in a page here, and we turn on the reflect, effectively this is much more going to be focused on things like how we feel like sort of they're able to succeed in a particular learning, how motivated they are and so on. But again, we've got sort of a range of different options available to us there, in terms of ways we can drill down for students, how they can move forward. Something to also think about is thinking about kind of your learning and thinking about your how we design learning for students. We can put in different access to things like the Immersive Reader and Captions and so on. But what we also can do is think about how we design things like PowerPoints and so on ourselves. So I think about, let's just go into here for a second. I'll just put up a quick new PowerPoint. There we go. Just bring that across to the screen here. Okay, so if we'll just add in a quick point here. So you'll notice that the minute we've got kind of that on our screen, we actually have accessibility built in to the Office environment, in terms of not just sort of tools like we said, captioning and so on, but we also have the ability to check how accessible what we've created is. So whether that's in Word, whether it's in PowerPoint, Sway has the accessibility checker as well. We have this accessibility checker available to us. Okay, so we can go into clicking at the bottom here where it says Accessibility Investigate. Okay, that gives us a whole tab around accessibility. So it's not just one small feature, it is actually kind of a built-in part of the Office suite now. Okay, and again, sort of around captions and subtitles are built in here. One thing it does do though is gets us to look at how a screen reader might read what's on your PowerPoint slides. So for any students where they use a device that has a screen reader in place, or uses the Windows 10 or Windows 11 screen reader, what this does is kind of shows you how effectively the screen reader will read things. Because when we design our PowerPoint slides, we don't necessarily think about the logical order a screen reader will take through our content. And so what that will do is give us a way to see that, so we can see the reading order pane there. So it will tell us kind of what we're actually reading here. Okay. What it will also do is pick up particular errors. Okay. So for instance, any image that you have in your PowerPoint, okay, will effectively need to have alternative text if it's going to be used by by a screen reader. Okay, so if I were to go to insert a picture, okay, from online, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to put in a picture of Wilfred Owen. Okay, ever the English teacher. Okay, put in a picture of Wilfred Owen. Now, automatically, okay, let's undo that. There we go. Okay, automatically, in terms of accessibility, this is going to pick up its own alternative text. Okay, so I can see that there's missing alternative text on slide 2. Okay, there we go. In fact, what I'll do is just edit the alternative text here. We can see that the alternative text comes up for the artificial intelligence as a person in a uniform. Now, actually, I want the screen reader to pick up who that is. So I would need to edit that text to say that that is Wilfred Owen. Okay, and that way then students have got a real context of who that is. The other option is also you can just mark images as decorative. So if it's not something that's relevant for the screen reader, you can just mark that kind of as it needs to be. So this can be really, really powerful for checking kind of both how accessible the view of things is, but also how accessible we have things like the screen reader and so on as well. Okay, so that's built in, as we said, to all of the Office suite. That's built into things like Sway as well. Okay, So just close that down there. Okay, so thinking about kind of around our different tools within accessibility, we have other things sort of that are available. We said Seeing AI, it's worth kind of investigating the Seeing AI app if that's relevant for your students. Gives the ability to take, a device and actually, effectively point around. Can't really show it here at the moment, but effectively you can point your device around to different things, and it will effectively auto describe what it's seeing. So if you point it at a table or a chair or whatever it is, it can even go into kind of like quite specific detail about kind of what it's seeing. So if you've got any students with sight impairment, I recommend checking out. I'll just quickly show it on the screen here, the Seeing AI app. There we go. So definitely worth kind of checking this out, and I've included this in our the Wakelet, so you can have a look at that as you go on. But effectively, that will give you the option to navigate the world, kind of using a device depending on sort of which device it is. Generally, that's available for things like iPads as well as phones as well. Okay, so thinking about sort of moving forward then, obviously we've got the options of using things like the Windows 10, Windows 11 navigation points of view. So just a quick point here, you can see my cursor's quite large here. Students and teachers can make kind of the Windows environment kind of accessible as well. So when we're thinking about kind of providing support for students, you can easily kind of access. I just pop into settings here. Okay, so I'm just in Windows 10 at the moment, but this works in Windows 11 obviously as well. But you have the ability to use the ease of access options. Okay, so you have a range of different things, and sort of things like high contrast and so on have been around for a very long time, but we do have the ability to turn on things like closed captions across everything in the device. We do have the option for sort of changing kind of things like the hearing settings, but we can also change sort of around how the mouse is seen, the sight of things. You can then change and customize that space to suit. Okay, so often for students, if they have a particular impairment or a particular need that is identified, you might have a bespoke device for them. Effectively, that can be built in. The problem you've got then is that student who's using that device in that way will have their device, but how about how yours is? So for instance, if you have the cursor and that kind of thing, just having that a bit bigger, sort of can be really, really helpful. And also knowing how to change the resolution of your screen. It doesn't necessarily have to be by changing the whole resolution within Windows 10, but actually being able to just very quickly kind of switch between, sort of effectively like different zooms. So if we take, for an example, let's go into the right one. Okay, here, just by zooming that in a bit more, for students, if there is a sight impairment and so on, that's just going to make life a little bit simpler in terms of kind of being able to see that from a larger screen point of view. So it means that we can make, sort of the front of the classroom more accessible as well. Last thing just to point out, let me just take that back down to 125. There we go. Within OneNote, you would have this within Word as well, whether it's desktop, whether it's online. You do have the ability to utilize the dictate tool. Okay, and again, this is available in quite a range of different places, but certainly is potentially very practical and useful for students where perhaps they find writing, sort of combative, or perhaps they, sort of they have difficulty. So this can be used from an engagement point of view, certainly kind of in those early steps, but also thinking about kind of, sort of for students where they might have a reader or scribe, sort of in their statement, in which case they can use the speech to text here. Okay, so if I turn on the UK there, I am dictating text. Full stop. So we can see that that will pick up kind of the text that we're saying. We can put in the punctuation. If you go into the desktop software for things like Word, you can actually get it to auto punctuate as well, which is, sort of, we can debate kind of, sort of around the auto punctuation, but we can get it to auto punctuate. Also, if we are thinking about using something like OneNote, not just being able to do speech to text dictation, but just being able to insert audio. So actually being able to use voice notes rather than using text-based notes. So if I wanted to reflect on my learning, so for instance, if I were to go into, let's go into a student's area here. Okay. If I then wanted to pop in a voice note around here, something to remind myself to do something, or, sort of perhaps rather than engaging in the lesson using a written form, perhaps I'm going to do my, sort of opening paragraph to my story, for instance, as a voice note. Okay, so I'm going to actually just kind of talk to the device rather than trying to write it to start with, at least. Perhaps that's a gateway into the task where I might find it difficult otherwise. Okay, so in which case I can just click on audio, and that's now recording me live. We can see kind of the counter going up at the top there, and effectively that is recording everything I'm saying. So whether that is me using that as a student to record an outcome, to be able to, sort of engage with the learning activity, or whether it's the teacher, sort of actually doing some audio feedback for a student's piece of work, that can be really, really powerful, because that links in with the options for Teams, so you can link in your class notebook. So this whole kind of class notebook environment, is effectively really sitting within your team. Okay, so it's the same kind of class notebook there, sitting within the team. Effectively, then I can use the assignments to be able to link that together. Okay, and just as we finish up, thinking about sort of some couple of different points to kind of think about moving forward. Obviously, using the insights across your different options here. So, you do have things like, sort of your insights for the Reflect app. You do have your insights for reading progress. So we haven't touched upon that at the moment, but I'll quickly kind of nod to it in a second. But effectively, you've got different reports for different areas of your the way you use Teams. So when you're thinking about for students who are, sort of with additional needs, we can actually kind of really start to look at the data that we've got about how they engage. And obviously, if we want to kind of look at things like Reflect and so on, that is there. Just last kind of point as we finish up, you do have also the reading progress tool built into your assignments, which then will allow you to effectively test, or not just test, but effectively practice with students their reading skills. So if we are thinking about kind of that moving forward, again, if you've got a student who is, sort of not necessarily fully non-verbal, but if they are certainly kind of, they don't necessarily want to kind of talk generally kind of in the classroom, you're finding sort of engagement with them difficult, this will give us the option to specify a text for them to be able to read. They can read that aloud with camera on or camera off. Okay, and then effectively it's going to auto mark that for me using artificial intelligence, using that machine learning. I can also overwrite that. So if there's a particular kind of phrase that they've got wrong, so in this case, this student is reading this aloud. At one point, she can't pronounce the word snow. And so she then checks with her parent about sort of, is it snow or snow? And so on. We can also then effectively kind of feed into that as well. And then you get that links back to these insights. Okay. I hope that's been useful. If there are any questions, I am sort of picking up questions in the chat. So let me just quickly sort of make sure that's open. So I am quite happy to answer any questions if we have any. And you have available to you this weight clip. Okay, so what I'll do is if I just pop the link to that into the chat for you. Okay, so hopefully you should be able to pick that up. I will be putting any resources around sort of accessibility and so on into this Wakelet. You also do have the ability to download a Microsoft Learn code. Okay, so you can literally go in to Microsoft Learn and set up a profile if you haven't done already, and then there is your Microsoft Learn code there. So that's WQPGNN. Please do feel free to use that. That you can use that for CPD, and hopefully we'll see you next week, where we'll be continuing our conversation around equitable education. We'll be looking at fostering wellbeing, and we'll explore things like the Reflect app in a bit more detail. Okay, thank you very much. Okay, I've just seen that there's an issue with the Wakelet. Let me just change that very quickly for you. That's the there you go. If you try it now, it should work. Okay, hopefully that should be all right. Okay, thanks very much, everybody.